everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. So glad to have you with us. We're calling it Redeeming Hope for a Suffering Planet with Stephen Scharper and Simon Appolloni, authors of the newly published Green Bible, which I will talk about in a minute. My name is Joseph Sinasak. I'm Publishing Director of Novalis Publishing. Novalis is organizing this webinar today in partnership with a couple different organizations, the Global Catholic Climate Movement Canada, and also with the help of the Integrated Sustainability Initiative of Trinity College here in Toronto. A few words about today's webinar before we really get started. First of all, just to let you know, you as our guests this afternoon have joined us from all over Canada and even a few places beyond Canada. We really appreciate you coming here. We think this is going to be a really fascinating discussion and a fun discussion. We're very much looking forward to it. We decided to do it because we are now, this year, 2020, 5 years since the publication of Laudato Si, Pope Francis' encyclical on creation and as our common home. To us, that encyclical was a watershed in the evolution of Catholic thought and attitudes towards the climate change crisis. And I do want to reinforce that word crisis. I think you'll see that as we go along. This encyclical underlined a growing understanding among theologians and ecologists and many others that the crisis around global warming was not just an economic crisis or a political crisis or even a cultural crisis, but it was also a spiritual crisis. And this is really what we're going to focus on today. We want to really help you and us together to develop a growing understanding of the spiritual nature of this crisis. And to that end, we published this book. It's a new revised edition of the Green Bible, Words of Love for a Suffering Planet. Later, I will tell you about how you can get your own copy. It's just fresh, hot off the press this month. And we're very, very happy about that. We feel very privileged to be able to put this book together. And I just wanted to say, in this book, authors Stephen Scharper and Simon, who you will meet in a few minutes, draw together a collection of passages from the writings of various religious sources, including scripture, popes, theologians, yes, those kinds of sources, but also poets, politicians, novelists, scientists, and activists, such as Greta Thunberg, to allow us to see the evolution of this kind of thinking about the environment that spans centuries, it spans traditions, races, ages, and even geography. Our hope, and we hope that you find this to be very fruitful this afternoon, is to spark a conversation and a reflection that will lead to a deeper integration of environmental awareness in the practical lives of your faith communities and ours. So that I can say by way of an introduction to this afternoon. As I said, we're very much looking forward to this. After the presentation, there will be lots of time for discussion and Q&A. And if you've used the webinar on Zoom before, you will know that at the bottom of the screen, there are some tools there for your use. One of them is a Q&A button. If you press on that Q&A button, a little dialog box will come up. You can write in your question. We are monitoring all those questions, and later we will bring them up for Stephen and Simon to address. So please feel free to throw as many questions in there as you want. And finally, I do want to say that as a gift from us for your participation in our discussion this afternoon, we are offering a 20% discount on your copies of the Green Bible. And at the end of the seminar, we'll show a slide. So take note, it'll have our website and a little code that you can use on our website to get your copy of the Green Bible 20% off. And so those are my introductory remarks. Now, the next thing we need to do is introduce our panel. So I'm going to do that right now. Welcome, panelists. Glad to have you with us this afternoon. Allow me to introduce them one at a time here. First of all, I want to welcome Agnes Richard. Agnes is going to moderate our panel discussion later, and we're very happy about that. She's the coordinator of the Global Catholic Climate Movement Canada, and she's very involved in climate change activism over many years. She's received training from both Al Gore's Climate Reality Project and the Global Catholic Climate Movement as a Laudato Si animator. And with a team of lay partners and the Office of Discipleship and Parish Life, she has planned and implemented a series of workshops called Change Starts With Us for the Catholic Diocese of Hamilton, Ontario. Agnes has been the coordinator for the Canadian chapter of the Global Catholic Climate Movement since it launched in September 2019. And Agnes, welcome. Glad to have you with us this afternoon. Next, we have Simon Appolloni. Simon is my colleague and our associate publishing director here at Novalis. He has a doctorate in religious studies and is also associated with the University of Toronto School of the Environment as a sessional lecturer. I'm sure some of you today may have had him as professor in the past, because I know this is his forte. In recent years, he has authored Convergent Knowing, Christianity and Science in Dialogue with the Suffering Creation, published by McGill-Queen's University Press in 2018. And of course, this newest book, which we talked about earlier. Now, last but not least, of course, is Stephen Scharper. Stephen is Associate Professor at University of Toronto, School of the Environment. Many of you already know him. He hardly needs an introduction, actually. He's a well-known advocate for environmental awareness, newspaper columnist, and a very popular speaker in this area. He's the author of numerous writings, including For Earth's Sake, Towards a Compassionate Ecology, which we at Novalis were very proud to publish in 2013. And he's also director of the Sustainability Initiative at Trinity College here in Toronto. So those are our speakers. I'm just going to unmute them now. I just want to say welcome to all of us, all you panelists this afternoon. So glad to have you with us. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Simon and Stephen.
Thank you, Joe. I am really glad to be here, and I'm talking to you from Waterloo. And I'll let Stephen explain to you where he's talking to you from. But I'm going to begin by just telling you, addressing the question, why immerse ourselves in the wisdom of voices that span centuries, traditions, races, ages, and geography? Well, Thomas Berry, geologian Thomas Berry once said long ago, and many others did, that the Christian tradition, as well as the humanist ethics that we use today, grew out of a cosmology that put the human at the center and above all of creation. It tends to be overly Western, somewhat patriarchal, hierarchical, and there seems to be, certainly with the Christian tradition, a goal to sort of escape the earth. So the question why we immerse ourselves in other voices is because the destructive patterns that we have cannot be critiqued from within. So we're really happy about this book because it looks at the voices of so many others. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Joe, Agnes, and all of you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to just first of all situate where I'm speaking to you from. I'm speaking to you from the Canadian Ecology Centre, which is lovely ensconced in the Samuel du Champlain Provincial Park in Mattawa, Ontario. And my wife, Hilary Cunningham, and I are guests of Backroads Bill Steer, who is the founding director of this wonderful Centre for Ecology. And behind us is Brother Fire. I'm going to see if I can show you Brother Fire here, keeping us warm on this snow-laden day. And behind me is a beautiful forest with wolves, moose, lynx, and a lot of Blue Jays. That'll make a lot of Toronto Blue Jay baseball fans very happy. And it's a real privilege to be able to work with Simon on this project. Simon had worked with me on For Earth's Sake, which Joe kindly mentioned, and had pulled together my thoughts and helped me with some of my thinking. So what we're attempting to do here, as Simon alluded, is kind of rethink at the species level our relationship with the other than or more than human world. And that's, again, bringing a motif from Thomas Berry, the cultural historian, world religions expert, and geologian. So it's a tremendous pleasure to be here. Also, just as we're going into this territory, as Simon well knows, it can be rough. When you teach environmental studies, you become a purveyor of the new gloomy science. I think environmental studies has displaced economics as the new gloomy science. So we're often walking through the Slough of Despond in teaching about this. So it's important to keep a sense of humor. So I'm just going to begin here, Simon, if I may, with an attempt at humor. And because we've gleaned from scripture, this is a biblically tinged attempt at humor. So there was a new minister, newly minted, and she wanted to get to know her congregants. So she decided to visit them at their homes. She went to one home and rang the bell. She didn't hear anything. She rang the bell again, and she heard footsteps padding across the living room, but no one answered the door. So the minister took out her calling card and simply wrote on the back of it, Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. And as we all know, Revelation 3:20 reads, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And she slipped it in the mail slot. Well, next Sunday, as she was going through the collection plate harvest, she smiled. She saw her calling card, and there was another scriptural citation, Genesis 3:10. She excitedly grabbed her Bible, looked up Genesis 3:10 and read, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid, for I was naked, so I hid. Just an attempt at humor with a little biblical flavor. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to start out quickly with a quick shout out to Hilary Cunningham, who was the first co-author of the original the Green Bible, and I want to thank her for entrusting me with this new iteration of this book. So thank you, Hilary. What Stephen and I are going to do for you is share two quotes each from the book that somehow speaks to us. I mean, they all do in many ways, but that we'd like to share with you at this moment. So if you indulge me, I'm going to share my screen here. I trust you can all see, Joe, I hope they can see the screen. Good. So I'm going to start. This is one of the quotes that I spoke to me, and this one is from the FAO, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. And it talks about topsoil, soil. Every year, over 27 billion tons of topsoil are washed away. The United States has lost about 1/3 of its topsoil since settled agriculture began. Worldwide, soil erosion puts the livelihoods of nearly 1 billion people at risk. Now you're saying, Simon, why is this meaningful? It's dirt. Well, is it? Soil, 6 inches of soil, of that top covering, mixed with a little rain, is actually what is keeping us from extinction. Soil is lost, however, 100 times faster than it's formed. And what is soil? It's not dirt. It's actually, if you take a teaspoon of really fresh organic soil, you will find millions upon millions of bacteria, ginormous amounts of microorganisms. If you expand that to one square meter of healthy soil, you add in oodles of worms, beetles, snails, and ants and spiders. In other words, the soil is teeming with life. And what is killing it is the modern farming system with its a huge amount of use of oil-based pesticides, nitrogen fertilizers that are killing these organisms, but also the tillage, the plowing also kills all these organisms. This whole process is exacerbated by climate change, which through further intense droughts and longer droughts and rainfall, just erodes the soil that much more. The irony here is healthy soil is actually a carbon sink. It absorbs the carbon from the air and actually it reduces our problem with climate change. What we need to do is find another way of farming, one that is regenerative. That's why this one really speaks to me. There is a hope here, but we have to change. Stephen?
Thank you, Simon. I really resonate with your focus on soil, and it relates in a sense to this quote from Greta Thunberg from her work, "No one is too small to make a difference." Adults keep saying, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. This to me is a deeply challenging quote. And for an older person like myself, it's a real summons and a wake-up call to what young people are inheriting and feeling. And we see this in our students, we see this in our children, we see this in the Friday school boycott movement around the world, that this is no longer a time for business as usual. For faith communities, we are Johnny-come-latelys to this environmental movement. And Simon, as you were talking about soil, I of course thought of Aldo Leopold, the founder of environmental ethics, who talked about the energy circuits of soil in the land ethic, that it wasn't just not dirt, writing in the 1940s. I think of Rachel Carson, and again, as you point out, Simon, all the pesticides and chemical fertilizers that have been so destructive of our ecosystems were leading to the vanishing of entire species of birds, including almost the bald eagle. So her notion of a silent spring was the notion of a spring bereft of birdsong. The churches were not at the forefront in 1949 when Aldo Leopold published a Sand County Almanac. The churches were not in the forefront in 1962 when Rachel Carson came out with Silent Spring and got pilloried by the chemical industry. The churches have awakened to this time, but there's a humility that we have to bring as people of faith as we join with other communities and the youth movement, such as the one that represents the energy and anger of Greta Thunberg, that we have to have the humility to listen and to partner in our creative and dynamic ways, but nonetheless with a sense of our place and our role here. We can't come and start dictating terms. We have to listen, be critically engaged, and humble as we join this movement. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Stephen. And I can't help but think that quote with the fire crackling in the background. It's a perfect venue. My next one is from Pope Francis, of course the famous encyclical Laudato Si, that's 5 years old now. Christian spirituality, he says, proposes an alternative understanding of the quality of life and encourages a prophetic and contemplative lifestyle, one capable of deep enjoyment, free of the obsession with consumption. We need to take up an ancient lesson found in different religious traditions and also in the Bible. It is the conviction that less is more. I love this quote, but part of it you have to understand is what comes after it is very important as well. The Pope goes on to say, I think it's in the next paragraph, happiness is found by limiting some needs that diminish us and being open to the possibilities that life can offer. There's a Walmart catalog magazine that it has as a title, Live Better. I don't know if you've seen it. I want you to juxtapose that to an Andean indigenous philosophy that exists, known in Quechua as Sumac Caue, in Spanish as Vivia Bien, but it has all various other names in different Andean languages and even in Spanish. But the best English translation that I would say for this would be live well, with the caveat of not better. The living better, certainly in the Walmart understanding, invariably comes to the detriment of others. And when I say others, I mean others, communities, those in sweatshops making the products at the other end of the world, but also the birds, the waters, the lands, the animals that are destroyed in the process. Conversely, living well ties the individual's welfare ineluctably to the welfare of the larger community. And by a community, I certainly mean of all the humans, but also of nature, the waters, the soils. And what I love about this Andean philosophy, and I understand it's the variations of the same philosophy shared by the indigenous populations here in Turtle Island in North America. What I love about it is its sense of reciprocity. And so when we look at less is more, from what Pope Francis is saying, it's less of what diminishes us and more of what nourishes us in mind, body, and soul. Stephen?
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I really appreciate the selection of that quote. And of course, the whole notion of integral ecology that Pope Francis unfurls in Laudato Si. And what I find refreshing, this is a remarkable document, as Joe and you have alluded. One of the wonderful endorsers of the book, Mary Jo Lettiak. Hi, Mary Jo, if you're there. And also a thanks to all those who endorsed the book before publication. Mary Jo once mentioned that she used this as spiritual reading, and I have done this as well. And one of the features of the integral ecology, as Pope Francis says, is to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor in a unified, simultaneous oral experience. And here there's a nod to the work of Leonardo Boff, twice silenced by the Vatican, but now rehabilitated in a sense thematically through this notion of integral ecology. And the quote that we see now is from Fyodor Dostoevsky, from the Brothers Karamazov. God's light, love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you will love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. I have a very talented graduate student who is from a Jewish tradition. And for her, this quote epitomizes what she understands of the heart of the Christian message, which is this deep love of all things, of creation. And I think this is important for us to remember as we embrace the environmental movement from various perspectives. But when people ask, well, what can faith communities bring to this conversation? I think this notion of a deep love of all things, of an integral love, is paramount. We saw this kind of deep love in many solidarity movements from faith traditions. Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, who, as you know, faced attacks, bombings of his home, a stabbing during a book launch, and still loved. And he was asked one time, how can you preach love of a sheriff who's kicking your head in. And he talked about agape love in the Greek tradition. Not necessarily philia love or eros, but agape love. A love of all things and all people because God loves them. That they are to be respected even if they are not acting in the way that they should be or are made to be. You don't wish ill on them. There's a love of all things. And Albert Schweitzer builds on this in his notion of reverence for life, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in medicine in Central Africa, that all of us share this reverence for life. From a worm wiggling out of the grass during a rainstorm to all of us struggling to find our place in the cosmos. This reverence for life becomes an ethic, and a love of that becomes central to what we do. Years ago, one very talented youth activist who was a student at the University of Toronto, Joanna Defoe, who did several degrees at Yale and is now doing amazing climate action work in Ottawa, she emailed me and said, I see the banners at the climate change movements, and the banners that I'm seeing is love is the movement. This is what I think we can articulate and exemplify in addressing this moment. And bringing that deep-seated love reflects the love of the Creator for the creation, which animates the entire universe. And Simon, you mentioned Turtle Island. I'm glad you did. I just want to share this tortoise shell, which Backroads Bill Steer of the Canadian Ecology Center found and shared with me. Bill thinks that this tortoise had climbed a number of railroad tracks to deposit its eggs, and on coming back over those tracks, kind of ran out of gas and perished, and was not hit by a train, but simply died on one of the rails. And its quest for life led it through this incredibly arduous path. And coming back, it passed away. But the love that Bill showed for this animal was expressed in treating its remains with great respect and carefully scooping out the remains, burying it, giving it an honorable burial. And the shell now helps us think about the turtles. There are 9 species of turtles in Ontario. Every single one is threatened or endangered. The love of all things leads to an animated energy to protect these creatures within our midst. It has a practical application as well as a spiritual foundation. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Stephen. That's actually a beautiful way of letting everyone know the subtitle of this book, Words of Love for a Suffering Planet. And it reminds me of my favorite quote from Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr, the way you love anything is the way you love everything. We can go on, can't we? I think it's time for question and answer. No? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good time for that.
Sounds good. And I have some good questions that have come in. Let's see here. Elaine asks, besides composting, using a rain barrel, and going scent and chemical free, what can those of us who are low income and poor in health actually do?
Thank you, Elaine, for your question. And it's such an important one. And I think that one thing that I find with the environmental moment is that we all interface with the environment every step we take, every breath we take, and that all actions have value, even if they're not at a grand scale. And part of this, as we've been trying to articulate, is pragmatic, and part of it is spiritual. Part of it is something that centers us within the whole fabric of creation. So some of this is in your own life, even if you're of ill health, finding a place for yourself to take tender, loving care of yourself, in sense, loving yourself, not in a narcissistic way, but in an authentic and embracing and caring way, just as you would other people. And in taking care of yourself and showing that care and loving kindness toward yourself and expressing that loving kindness toward others, even if one is limited by health concerns or debilitating health concerns, you're bearing witness to the love in creation. And all those pragmatic steps that you mentioned are, of course, excellent and foundational. But also remembering that you are part of a larger community. You're not alone. That the divine, certainly in the Christian tradition, doesn't have us flying solo through the cosmos. And connecting to that spiritual interconnection within yourself and expressing that to others can be a very powerful witness as you go through the day. And that kind of celebratory joy and centering can be so powerful in ways that you may never know to the people whom you encounter.
Amen.
Simon, did you want to add to that?
Oh, Elaine, thank you for that question too. I won't, I think Stephen said it very well, but understanding that idea of living well, how our welfare is ineluctably, is really tied to the welfare of others. When we smile, we are sending love to others, and that is going to make a difference, as Stephen said, that more than you can think. It doesn't have to be moving mountains. If it comes from the heart, it's a great start.
And I just wanted to add, Elaine, if you are in poor health, we just send positive thoughts of healing and of good health to you at this time.
Yeah, agreed. Our prayers are with you, Elaine. It's actually a nice segue into my next question. For those who are new to these discussions, who are maybe surprised at the depth of our multiple crises, and as the realization of that begins to sink in and hit home, many of us could feel anger, grief, and despair as our first response. How does the Green Bible point to hope and action?
Oh, wonderful. When I teach a course at U of T on Introduction to Environmental Studies, some students might even be watching right now. I start off the first few sessions by telling it as it is, from what the scientists are telling us. And I joke with them, and I said, nobody ever invites me to dinner anymore. And they say, oh God, Simon's gonna come, he's such a downer. And in some ways, you have to say the truth. You have to, just as the pandemic is killing so many, we have to say the truth as it is, as scary as it is. And it is scary. What we're doing to our soils, what we're doing to our air, I didn't even go into what we're doing to our waters. It is very scary. However, there's something about what is happening that, and I remind my students this, wait till the end of the course, because there is hope. There is hope, and there's something there's a hope that comes through. I like to think it's the Holy Spirit, it's the earth, the universe talking, whether it's through Greta Thunberg, whether it's through the scientists, whether it's through the women, the indigenous, the voices are being heard. And it's a matter of tuning into that hope. I think that is where we should put our hearts and minds.
Thank you, Simon. And Stephen, you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Agnes. A great question. And two trajectories come to mind in responding. One is talking to elders. And I remember my grandmother, who had lived through the pandemic of 1918, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War. And she was not a wealthy woman, but she was a mirthful woman, a joyous woman. And my father couldn't call her mom because she wasn't his actual mom, but he called her Mirth because she had a joy and a faith that pulsated through those crises. And she never lost her sense of humor. All of those moments of great despair and great suffering, with her son fighting in the South Pacific, with the family fortune lost, with all these cataclysmic events, she persevered. And often I find in talking to elders, they've seen a lot of the undulations of history and can put even our present moment, despite its unprecedented elements, into perspective. The second is a more scientific reflection. And here, two thoughts come to mind. One is Tim Flannery, the Australian climatologist who did an incredible book, The Weather Makers, which was quite despairing about 15 years ago about the environmental crisis. But not long ago, he wrote a second book, An Atmosphere of Hope. And he said he had become so depressed by his own data, he couldn't put pen to paper. But then he began to see the signs, the pragmatic signs of hope. One was the World Economic Forum, for the first time in 40 years of data collection, had shown that even though for one particular year, climate pollution gases, greenhouse gases, had flatlined, economic indicators went up. That was the first time. So a growing economy was happening, but not with more pollution. Secondly, he was seeing that climate change had become known to people in nations of the North, powerful industrialized nations. It wasn't simply something happening in Tuvalu or in Bangladesh. We see in Toronto people's basements flooding. We see these wildfires in the West Coast, California. My sister had to flee from her house with wildfires. This is happening on a wide scale. It's no longer something happening over there, and people are awakening to it. And third, he was seeing the positive advances in carbon capture. And Simon talked about soil, and there's so much happening now in terms of regenerative agriculture and soil sequestration in agriculture, in addition to other kinds of natural forms of carbon sequestration, including seaweed harvesting, etc. And these are detailed in his book. And thirdly, I just want to mention a film that I share with my students for this very reason. And it's Before the Flood. And this was done by Leonardo DiCaprio in the role of UN Ambassador for Peace on climate change. And he went around the world interviewing people and filming devastating but also hopeful dimensions of climate change. This film opened at the Toronto International Film Festival several years ago. And Leonardo DiCaprio was there with some of the scientists whom he had interviewed. And he said, I was despairing in making this film until I interviewed Dr. Peter Sierres. He was a NASA scientist who had done this incredible modeling of climate change and climate emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in real time. So it's filmed in the documentary. And as he's talking to DiCaprio says, well, what if we stopped? What if we reduced this? Would the polar ice caps come back? And he said, oh, yes. There will be a time frame, of course, where the greenhouse gases we've emitted, it'll take a couple of decades for them to reach their apex, but nonetheless, this can come back. And he said, well, you sound hopeful. And he said, well, I am, because we know what's causing this. It's not like a mysterious disease that is hurting Gaia. We know what's happening, and we know how to rectify it. And the earth can heal. And in showing this to my classes, a number of students come and say, this is the first hopeful conversation on climate change I've ever heard. And I think this is important to remember, that this is a wide spectrum of conversation. Sometimes we accent the negative. There are many positive regenerative dimensions. And I'll just finish with this thought that I've had over the years, that the power of life exceeds our scientific and theological grasp. The power of life is a mystery that I don't think we will ever fathom. And that, to me, gives me hope.
Thank you. And I think some of us have seen reports while we are limiting our interactions because of a global pandemic, the amazing resilience of life on Earth to rebound and respond to us stepping back a little. That's, as you say, Stephen, a wonderful reason for hope. A question from Kathleen. She says she's concerned about the exclusion of women from full participation in many faith traditions and the failure to see the link between that and those most affected by climate change. And Kathleen asks for both of your thoughts on this concern.
Thank you, Kathleen. That's actually a very important question. And as you might well know, the ecofeminist thinkers have found that the connection between the domination of women and the domination of nature. There seems to be this patriarchal way of showing that one dualism's higher. Women are of the body, man of the mind is good, the body not good, and you then transfer that sort of warped thinking onto the earth, and you say, well, the mind and thoughts, the rational mind is what's good, and the actual earth itself is soulless. It's body, it's just dirt. And I would say that thanks to in a large part to certainly ecofeminist thinkers, but eco-womanist thinkers. There are many variations of women thinkers who have made this connection and say, no, this is not right. And they've taken the lead so much. I'm thinking of Wangari Maathai, who's now dead, who started the Greenbelt movement in, oh my God, I'm forgetting the country in Africa. I don't know, Stephen, if you recall. Yeah. Yes. And she was also in part of the government there, and she was a leader, and she brought this idea of tangibleness, of concrete life is absolutely important. We're not living in the abstract. And by bringing that concreteness home, we've realized what is truly important. Now, having said that, yes, still on the larger scheme of things, certainly within the church, the woman's voice is not being heard. And that's just sinful. It's wrong. And it must be changed. But elsewhere, you can hear it soar and thunder. And even in the halls of academia, even the Catholic academia, you hear it soar and thunder. And I think that's very hopeful. And I believe it will change one day.
Thank you. Stephen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you for the question. Really a tremendously important question. And two thoughts come to mind. One is something I was alluding to at the beginning, and that's humility. And the churches that engage in this sinful patriarchy have to humbly acknowledge their role in a structured sin. And we talk a lot about personal sin, of course, following one's commandments, etc. But there's the notion of social sin, that we can be involved in social structures that create a structured evil. And so the environmental crisis runs along the same fault lines of social, political, economic, racial, and gendered oppression. And in dealing with these, the churches have to acknowledge where they have participated in those structural sins. And one of the deepest is patriarchy. And of course, Rosemary Radford Ruther in the United States, Heather Eaton here in Canada, and a whole raft of other ecofeminists, as Simon has alluded, have helped us think in new ways about that. So there's a humble acknowledgement of our participation. Secondly, I think of an amazing woman, Jane Goodall, who has helped us understand the relationship with primates in a new and exciting way, but was marginalized at first because she wasn't following the traditional academic pathway, and she was a young woman doing this research with Dr. Leakey. Had she been suppressed, many of the insights that she brought forward that have scientific merit as well as incredible environmental power may never have entered the scene. I remember, for example, as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto, being told in first year, humans are the only animals that use tools. Well, of course, Jane Goodall observed primates, chimpanzees using tools, etc. So that was busted. That was one of the insights she helped see. But her whole environmental program through Roots and Shoots and conservation has been a godsend to the earth as a courageous and loving woman. And so celebrating that kind of contribution from women like Jane Goodall and those less celebrated, but nonetheless equally committed and steadfast and important, is essential. And the churches have to understand that. And they have to come to grips with their own participation in this evil of structured oppression of women.
Ask one final question and ask you each to give 1 minute to it. This has been posed in several different ways by a number of contributors. John and Joe and let's see, there are a couple of others, but the question is, I've heard pastors say that the priority of our faith is the salvation of souls. How does that relate to the need to show love of all creation? And do we show our love as Christians in a public way? And how should we? That's a big question, but 1 minute each only.
One
Simon?
minute?
You 1 minute.
One, oh my gosh. It's the soteriology, you know. Just a,
1 minute.
I left you with a tough one.
You got 45 seconds now, buddy.
hurry. A big question. What can I say? I'm a fan of Rosemary Radford Ruther, as is Stephen. And she, in all her writings, confused redemption and salvation. She used them interchangeably. And when you ask her, are you talking about the afterlife and going to heaven? Or she never said no. But you look what she writes, and she's talking about the redemption of the woman at the well not having water, or the woman who has to walk kilometers and kilometers to get the water. She's talking about the now, where the child has dysentery in southern countries that have been ravaged by floods because we want our SUVs. She's talking about the now that Jesus knows when he healed the woman who touched his sandal. It's the now. It's the now. And if there is the then thereafter, so be it. But for me, if we can't love and live the kingdom, the reign of God right now, I don't see any point in there being a religion.
Okay, I have to give a minute to Stephen. Thank you very much, Simon.
Yes, just to build on Simon's point, great questions, by the way. That's one reason we did the Green Bible, because we're showing the scriptural injunctions from Deuteronomy and elsewhere. The earth is the Lord's. It's not yours. Our salvation here eternally is tied up with how we treat God's creation. That's biblically based, and that's also based in many faith traditions. God does not make this earth to be our jungle gym, dumpster, playground, and disposable entertainment piece. It is a sacred creation. The way we treat it will have implications for us, not only in terms of the toxins we are now ingesting and the microplastics we're drinking. It's estimated that each of us in this webinar has about 1 pound of plastics in us right now. That's not the only judgment. We will be accountable for how we treated God's creation. This is our home. God is letting us hang out here, but we're not the owners. God comes back and says, okay, how'd you take care of my home? what'd you do? And, oh, sorry, we've eliminated a third of the species, we've polluted all the oceans, and we've contaminated the air. Is that okay, God? I don't think so.
Not okay, not okay. I have to stop there. I have to, many wonderful questions have been rolling in the last 5 minutes. So I'm not sure if there's an opportunity later on, maybe Joe can answer this, that once our panelists see the chat, they might be able to answer later on. But thank you everyone for putting wonderful thought-provoking questions into our Q&A. Joe, I send it back over to you now. Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. Thanks again, Agnes, for leading us in the discussion. Unfortunately, time is drawing to a close. Before we go, however, I do want to give final word to Simon and to Stephen. So we do have a few minutes here, and I'm going to turn the floor back over to our two authors. So back to you, Simon and Stephen.
Thank you, Joe. I'll keep this quick. Another quote, and this is actually Stephen's. It's his that he made in For Earth's Sake. I love it. I use it at the end of my course because it really brings everything together. He says, "We can make ourselves more knowledgeable, change all our laws, fashion new policies, and even design cutting-edge sustainable technologies. But none of these will take hold until we change our relationship with creation." And I'll go really quick example. There's a movie called Downsizing. I don't know if you've seen it, with Matt Damon. It's sort of a sci-fi fantasy, and everyone was shrunk down to 5 inches. And the idea was, we'd be less of a footprint on the environment. And they thought this technology, it would save us. But guess what? You watch the movie and you see all the ills and the living excesses to the detriment of others. All those problems were brought to the small world. And it tells me that all the policies and technology you can have, unless you change your relationship, it's going to come back. Stephen?
Thank you, Simon. I'm very touched that you chose that quote. Much obliged. I wanted to end with a quote from Thomas Berry. And he writes, "What is happening in our times is not just another historical transition or simply another cultural change. The devastation of the planet that we are bringing about is negating some hundreds of millions, even billions, of years of past development on the Earth. This is a most momentous period of change, a change unparalleled in the 4.5 billion years of Earth history. All indications suggest that we are, in a sense, a chosen group, a chosen generation. We did not ask to be here at this time. Some of the prophets, when asked to undertake certain missions, said, 'Don't choose me, that's too much for me.' God says, 'You are going anyway.' We are not asked whether we wish to live at this particular time. We are here. The inescapable is before us. And we are invited to the great work, as Thomas Berry says, of healing human-Earth relations. We're invited now to befriend rather than besmirch our home, creation, our planetary household. And I just want to conclude by saying thank you to all who were involved in this. Thank you to Bill Steer and the Canadian Ecology Center for being such a wonderful host. And thank you to Simon and Novalis. Thank you, Agnes, and all who participate in this webinar. Peace.
Thank you. And we're all going. We've all been sent, and now it's our turn to go out.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. That brings our hour to a close. I do have a final couple concluding comments over the next couple of minutes. I do, first of all, want to thank all our panelists who've been with us today, Simon and Stephen and Agnes, for all of your work. We live in dark times, there's no doubt about it. Whether it's the political climate or dealing with the pandemic that we all are dealing with, or the ever looming and ever worrisome climate change crisis, these are dark times. But what we have today, I believe, is not sugarcoating it, but certainly taking a very realistic look at it bringing some fresh wisdom to this, and more than ever, hope. Expressions of hope, but also stories of hope, real hope. And to me, that is one of the biggest takeaways that I have from today. And I want to thank Simon and Stephen for bringing all of that hope to us today. I also want to thank you, our many participants from all over Canada. And I noticed by looking at the chat that there are some from the United States and UK as well. It's so good to have all of you. I've been watching your chat comments quite closely. Again, your prayers, your thoughts, your stories have also been very inspiring. Certainly, I will be sharing them with our panelists. And there are way more questions than we can obviously deal with today. We'll see if we can find a way to follow up this webinar with some kind of text response to that. So I want to thank you for that. Just a couple concluding reminders. I also need to thank the Global Catholic Climate Movement Canada for its involvement here this afternoon, and the Sustainability Initiative at Trinity College. It's been great to have your support. It's been wonderful working with all of you on this webinar today. And finally, just a reminder for all of our participants, you can get 20% off the price of your copy of the Green Bible if you go to Novalis, www.novalis.ca, use the code GREEN20. And I noticed from the chat, a couple of people said they had tried it. It's not quite ready yet, so I urge you to wait till the end of the day. It's just a little computer thing that'll take a couple hours to get it moving, but it should be ready to go. And then you please use it. If you are in the United States or in the UK, you can still get copies of the Green Bible, certainly from Paulus Press in the US, and in the UK, from Redemptorist Publishing, and in Australia and Asia from Garrett Publishing. So the book will be available widely around the world. That's all I have to say today. Thank you one and all. Have a wonderful afternoon and take care.